and welcome to this session called Tales of a Button That Wasn't, Accessibility in the Software Development Lifecycle. My name is Quinton Belston. I've been an Android developer since around 2011. I originally come from South Africa, but currently living in London. What I'd like to share with you today is an experience I had while working on a project. Normally in a project, I would feel that at refinements, I wasn't as engaged or as curious as I would have liked to have been. And I identified this as a problem I wanted to work on. It was something I wanted to be better at. And the way I approached it was I started asking myself, how do I generate appropriate questions that really get to the heart of identifying dependencies earlier and making the quality of what I produce better? And two kind of umbrella terms that arose out of this problem was test-driven development. I'm a big fan of test-driven development, but that's not what we're going to talk about today. And the second one is accessibility, and how accessibility and test-driven development have enabled me to sort of generate curiosity when it comes to refinement and being effective and focused on the work that I do. Before I get started, what I'd like to do is discuss some differing perspectives of disability. Like the way we approach disabled people and the way we perceive that is really important when it comes to creating accessible solutions. And I'd like to focus on three of the main disability models that we can have. They're not the only ones, but these are sort of the big players in kind of software. So by looking at the medical model of disability, the medical model presents disability as a problem in need of a cure. And the problem is brought about by some kind of negative health occurrence. So what we're saying here is that disability is something that should have a cure and should not be present. Now, the disadvantage of this is disabled people can end up feeling left out or pressured to fit in as best they can without making that much of a fuss. That all their problems are something that they need to overcome, and they're kind of like until the medical field has caught up to a point where they can cure everything, that's where they're left. And that's really problematic because a cure doesn't exist for every kind of situation, and situations aren't necessarily permanent. People aren't always permanently blind or permanently deaf. So this perspective from a software oriented model doesn't help. And the next one is the functional model. The next one is kind of where compliance comes in. It's a practical perspective that identifies the limitations due to disability. We acknowledge them, and the intention becomes to create and promote solutions to overcome those limitations. So it sounds like it's got a really good goal in mind. Hey, there's a problem, let's solve the problem. And our primary task is to eliminate or reduce the impact of the limitations of the body through technological and methodological innovation. And that sounds great, but the results aren't always very practical or even useful to the people that are using these things, using these solutions. And I'll talk about how compliance can kind of get you into a bind a little bit later. And then you've got the social model. The social model presents the idea of disability as a social construct brought about by the environment. This accepts people the way they are, where they are, when they are, kind of thing. The issue is to create an environment in which the diversity of all kinds of people can successfully navigate society and digital areas. And this presentation will come from that perspective because it's become very useful when we see disability from this perspective. We can identify a far greater range of solutions that help people from from varying walks of life. For example, voice access. You might think for someone who shakes a lot, voice access would be great, but it's not just that kind of person who benefits. Voice access can be really useful while you're driving. Uh, uh, and like being able to just interact with your phone via voice is super useful. So we've found that the social model and the social perspective of disability has got the best benefit for producing the best apps. All right, so with that out of the way, let's get started with our story. Once upon a time, a group of developers received a design similar to this. I've boiled it down to its key component, which is this action thing, right? Now, the problem, to jump a little bit ahead, the problem was that in refinement, nobody said, what is this? It looks like a button, but it also kind of looks like a link. It's a bit ambiguous as to what this is. And we went the wrong way. We took the route of taking it easy, right? So yeah, anyway, I joined this mature project, and components like this were fairly common. Now, a sighted user doesn't care whether this is a button or a link. To someone who's visually or cognitively impaired, it can make a huge difference, because buttons generally do things inside your app, and whether they are on the same screen or taking you to another screen, but you'll generally stay in the same screen, whereas a link will take you outside to a mobile site or to some kind of mobile web content. And the modes of navigation change significantly on phones when you go from an app to a mobile app. If you ever want to experience this, just open up a news website on your phone and try and navigate that news website even without any accessibility tools. Just try and navigate that and read the article without getting an advert in the way. Those mobile sites are horrendous when it comes to accessibility issues, because even for sighted users, you just can't get to the content. Now the thing is, what happened with this component was an unwitting experiment. So our first iteration was to make the mistake that I said. We didn't ask that question, and just asking the question, what is this, would have resolved the entire problem. But we didn't. And so the developer came along and made it a label. So this is Android code. It's how we, in XML, we would create a label. And the reason why the developer chose a label, developers, just like everybody else, are trying to do the least amount of work to get the job done. So buttons come with a whole bunch of padding and background colors and all sorts of stuff and animations that are attached to it. And so a label is just far less amount of work to get that component out onto the screen. And all we have to do, as with any control, is we add a on-click listener in the code. So, and this passed code review. So not only did one developer look at it and say, hey, this is a great solution, but actually several did, at least 3. And we don't have to worry about destyling the button or anything like that. So a label just out of the box seemed like a great solution. And when I looked through the app, even though we're not working on it anymore, this problem still exists. And so we thought, okay, we've got this really great solution, and it was simple until it wasn't. We got this bug back from our users that when using the app, and when the element is highlighted, the user thinks it's a label or a heading, but they're confused because it announces double tap to activate with the name of the action, but it would suggest that it's a button. So the problem is, it gets there and it says, like, let's say the action is just action. It would say action, double tap to activate. But what does that mean? Does that mean I'm going to do something inside the app? Does it mean I'm going to go outside of the app? What does it mean? Now, it's at this point that what happens is we get the announcement is incorrect, or it needs to be identified as a button so that the users know that they're not going to be exiting the app. So when people communicate the problem in their language, a developer is going to come back and try and do the least amount of work again to make it work without changing the original piece of work, because whatever was done was enough to pass that code review. So then the next iteration is to say, okay, let's fix just the problem. We don't want to do an entire refactor, because that means we're going backwards. So this is where the software development lifecycle comes in, is the decision to do the least amount of work to just fix the problem or do an entire refactor can come in at this point. And again, we chose not to do the refactor. We decided to change the content description, which was to say, okay, let's put the action text and then just give it a comma button. Now, what's nice about this is we're changing the content description, so it's invisible metadata associated with the control as opposed to something visible. We don't have to change the XML, which is, to a developer, an Android developer, a very big advantage. And what will happen is in English, this will work. And so that presents the next problem, is what if we support multiple languages? If we support multiple languages, we need to be really careful, because when we introduce button ourselves as the word, how do we know we're not using an incorrect word in another language or an inconsistent word? Because if we think about it in another language, you could be going through and it could be announcing button, 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 and then something that's not quite a button but might be similar to a button that we've translated either incorrectly or just inconsistently, and we're providing this inconsistent experience, which would just leave the app being very unprofessional, right? So languages become a very important thing, and also the order. How do we know that we're being consistent in that saying action and button is the right thing? Maybe in another language it's button and then the name of the thing, right? And then we get this last one, is the navigation is incorrect. And I'd like to talk about how disabled users interact with devices. Not all disabled users are the same. Not all users are the same, right? They interact with the device in a very different way. We've got several different controls that allow us to interact, or allow all users to interact. We've got voice access, talkback, and this is all just on Android. Screen readers, braille back, and a whole bunch of other things. But normally in sort of talkback mode, which I strongly recommend people just give a try, is they would use swipes to navigate the app. And so swiping, they will go through and they will highlight different components in a sequence and then use a double tap to interact with that control. So this is one way of doing it. It's not the only way by far. Sometimes what happens is that tree gets associated, every node in the tree gets associated a number, and in voice access then you would just dictate the number to interact with. But when you're navigating, it can get really frustrating for users to navigate through like a very full or dense screen. So they sometimes navigate with headings or with controls. And so this call to action label would get skipped as a control because it is a label. It might not because it's got a on-click listener associated with it, but that is more luck than it is designed. So yeah, and if you look at how Stephen Hawking, if you watch some of Stephen Hawking's videos, you'll see the way he used to interact with his devices was it would auto scroll through the components, and he would use a mouth-operated button to hone in on the right control. and interact with it. And so headers and links and that kind of navigation become really, really important for our users, so they know how to interact with the app. And so when we want to change navigation, this is now the final form that came out to fix this problem. Is we had to do this on that control every time it was displayed to the user. We would set an accessibility delegate on the control and then associate its class name with a button. And this solves the announcement issue, and it solves the navigation issue. So now this label will have those problems fixed. And it's quite a viable solution for other controls. So if you're making a bespoke control that's like a layout consisting of a whole bunch of more things, so inside it's got a picture and a number, or if you've got a homogenized control, this is a really great way to get that association to whether it's a button or a label or something like that. But for just a label to be announced as a button, obviously this is far too much. And there's another problem, or maybe there's a few more problems that can come out. And so you can start to see the back and forth in communication that could happen, right? Because disability is not just a screen reader. Disability can be being colorblind, not being able to see the right contrast, or the control not responding to different color changes on the app. For example, having dark mode options is another real big quick win you can do in your apps to make it more accessible to people. And yeah, so all of these issues come out quite immediately. And touch target size is also, it turns out, really important, because if you've ever struggled to tap on anything on your screen, you know what I'm talking about. When, like, I constantly misspell city mapper when I'm looking for city mapper on my phone. And I'm always hitting the O instead of the I. And it's like this annoyance for me that I haven't managed to fix. And it's just because the keyboard, I'm struggling to type on the keyboard more than anything else. So this is what, in reflection, we should have done, right? Is all we really needed to do is replace text view or label with a button, and then give the background color a transparent color. This would have made it a button that comes with all the margins that have been pre-programmed for touch target size, all the announcements, everything ready. So the text color itself is not a great text color because it's just static, but we're not focusing on that particular issue today. And yeah, so by using the correct component at the start, we would have avoided a lot of these issues and several more. Labels don't have the default touch target sizes. Buttons are built specifically to have a larger touch surface, and then the announcement would have just been fixed. And the translation from that text would be for free and for all users. And in fact, the translation would be for all languages that the Android device supports, not just the languages we support in our app. And so we discovered that by making accessibility an acceptance criteria, when we get a screen like this, when we receive a design like this, we can start asking a whole bunch of questions that will help us do this better, right? And the center one, are there validation behaviors, is actually a really good question that will dive deeper. One of the big problems I have is login screens or disabled buttons, right? When apps just disable buttons, they tend to be skipped by screen readers. And this creates a problem because a user doesn't even know that button exists. A user who can't see that the button is disabled and can't see the screen would never know that that button's even on the screen. So they'll have like a username and login field. They'll know that those fields exist, but by accident scroll past them maybe, or scroll past one, and they haven't met some kind of criteria, like their password isn't long enough, or it isn't an email. And because it's just, oh, we'll just do this quick solution of disabling the button until all the fields are valid, and people think that that's a viable solution without providing any kind of error mechanism. It means that you are discriminating against users who can't see what's going on. And so the recommended behavior for validation, for example, or instead of having a disabled button, would be to enable the button, but the validation behavior would produce an error at the right place for the user. And so I feel that accessibility can really fuel curiosity and engagement and help you be better in refinement, because you'll be asking these questions and engaging with the people presenting you with the work before the work gets done. And when you implement some basic accessibility and user questions just as a part of your definition of ready, we stop playing what I like to call Jira tennis. And Jira tennis is where you've got a ticket, you get it done, you try to do it as best you can, you throw it over to developers. Developers then do it as best they can according to the very well-structured acceptance criteria, and then they throw it over the wall to quality assurance, and they do the bare minimum, right? And I find that Jira tennis is really an unfortunate and horrible activity to engage in, because it doesn't end at the quality assurance. What then happens is quality assurance will then throw it onto the user. And then when users have problems, it gets thrown, bounced around, and tickets never really get done like that. That's not an effective way to do ticket management. So what I've realized is that a common objection that you might come across is, like, as a developer, like, hey, that's the designer's job. They should be asking these questions. They should be giving me those answers before it even gets to me. These gaps are where the nets for Jira tennis kind of sit, right? Right inside here is where we start knocking these tickets around and knocking the work around, and also not being kind of disingenuous with our users by sort of isolating ourselves and creating those silos, right? Can you imagine a developer who didn't test any of their code? If you believe that you're even just running it to see if it runs is an important test, because you can't give that to quality assurance and expect it to pass. So the thing is, by creating these gaps, all we end up doing is filling it with negative actions, right? So like for a very good example is just developers taking the feature that they've done, testing it in a very typical way. I mean, a sort of stupid example would be that a developer creates a button on a screen. That button is supposed to take you to another screen and deliver it to quality assurance. And so a developer would open the app, tap the button, see that the action works, and say, cool, I'm done, and give it to quality assurance. Now, that can kind of sound okay, but did they ever just open the app, not tap the button? And if the screen opened automatically, then they would know, oh, right, I just put a timer in rather than actually associating that action with the button. I know it's a silly example, but it could happen that something like that happens. Or even worse, let's say they've attached the action to the entire screen, and so that you don't even have to tap the button, you could tap the background and it would still take you to the next action. So there, the developer wasn't testing the correct bounds were there. And so like you can bounce tickets around with silly things like this all the time. So we need to be more careful about how we interact with people, and you can reduce all this toxicity by saying, no, this is our job, right? So when we allow for some overflow in our roles, you'll find that you're taking responsibility and trying to do work with more people faster and better. So while developers are not designers, our job is not to design the app. We are the implementers of the design. And so we do take some responsibility for that design. And so we have to ask questions. We have to look for what's going to make the app good and bad. I cannot advise on what looks like nice colors, but I can put those colors into a tool and make sure that the background and the foreground do play well with people with different types of color blindness, for example, that they'll be able to actually read the button. And so by asking these questions earlier, it's better for the team, better for the project, and now we've taken those nets down. And so we're making our SDLC much more effective, and we're saving money, we're saving time, and we're actually doing the right thing for our users. Many, many years ago, I had this really toxic job where as developers, we were throwing tickets over to quality assurance and over the wall kind of thing. And it didn't just damage the app we were creating, it damaged the relationships that we were fostering inside the company itself. And the testers didn't actually like the developers as people, which was really awful. The workplace became extremely toxic, and thankfully a senior developer came in and sort of saw this sort of underlying culture that was the problem, as opposed to the code that was the problem, and said, okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to change the way we work. We're going to say that once a developer is finished with a ticket, they are going to demo that ticket to the QA in person, and the QA can ask a few questions, do a quick assessment, and if they accept it, then it's not QA'd, but at least the QA can feel that they would be more capable of taking that on as part of their course of work. And that changed the environment almost from the first day. And so I would like to propose we do this for all levels at the right time. Like designers and developers can have their conversations at refinement. Development and QA can kind of happen in sprint. I've taken this a little bit more forward in the way I've taken this forward in my current positions that I do is when I do something that has a visual element to it that is going to go to a QA, I generally do a recording of the problem, a video recording of the problem, and then a video recording of the solution. And I attach that to the ticket. So that means that I don't have to sit with the QA on a personal level. I don't mind doing that. But I avoid trying to get them into a meeting because I think we have enough meetings in our world to not want that too much. So by having the recordings go up, problem, solution. The QA can look at it before they even look at the app, download the app or whatever, and they can see quickly, oh yes, this looks right. Or, hey, you just got a little bit of copy wrong, or no, this is really wrong just from the outset, you need to fix it. And so just by looking at the video, they can give me quick feedback and I can quickly take it on and redo it. It also helps me in other ways. It helps me keep context. So if somebody comes to me and says, hey, we want to demo the work that was done, here's a ticket from 2 months ago that we want to demo. Normally, without these videos, I'll just go, I don't know what I did 2 months ago. I'd have to go and revisit the ticket, see that the work still exists, that the problem is still resolved. Maybe it's changed in other ways over that time, and it's just awful. Whereas if there's a video, we can say, this is what the problem was. This is the solution. If you want a more up-to-date video, I can totally just make you a new one. But it keeps me in context quite well. And so I'd really like to facilitate the idea that we're working together to make life better. And things like accessibility can really not only make your app better, but make your communication processes much, much better. All right, so what I'd like to do is just discuss how to start all of this. Now, reading through the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, I always pronounce it WCAG. I don't like saying WCAG because it just sounds weird to me. Even if you're a mobile app developer, because I know not a lot of web content can translate into mobile content, but these guidelines have 4 primary principles. They're perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Now, when you look through the guidelines, you'll see under each heading, there's quite a lot for each of these principles. So it's a bit of a cognitive load. It's really worth taking a look and just having a general understanding of what the guidelines are trying to look at, right? And there are 3 levels in which to which each guideline is associated, right? So every element can either be single A, double A, or triple A. Single A would be the minimum level of requirement that any electronic content should have. So a single A is, if you are not achieving a single A guideline, you're really doing a really poor job in terms of accessibility. That is, it's the bare minimum. It's you could kind of consider it barely compliant. I'm going to talk about compliance as an issue later, but like this is really bare bones accessibility. Double A is seen as the acceptable level accessibility for many online services, which should work with most assistive technology. And so by saying we want to achieve a double A level is seen as reasonable. You're going to be putting the work in, and you're not just trying to not get sued or anything like that. I think listing the advantage of accessibility as being, removing the possibility of getting sued is not really a good approach. I think the real core reason why you should be considering accessibility is because you don't want to discriminate against people. And being able, one of the questions that people ask is not do we want to do accessibility or not, but who are we discriminating against? Who do we want to discriminate against? Because that's a more telling answer, and probably will get people thinking a little bit more. And then the final level is AAA. AAA is the gold standard, and provides everything for a complete accessible offering. So this would mean you are going to try and achieve every single guideline in the WCAG. And this would make the difference between a very good experience and an excellent one for all users. So yeah, from compliance, most apps would just need to achieve an A or a double A, whereas government and medical apps are required to adhere to AAA. And I think it's really important to attempt to understand the experience that users have by using the tools that they use. So start getting used to how TalkBack works, how switch navigation works, keyboard navigation. I do it quite a lot where as soon as my mouse stops working or whatever, I will try and use the keyboard to navigate a site. And that really helps me. So even as someone who doesn't consider themselves disabled, I still benefit from these accessible tools. And again, well, not again, but like what I need to really press is that even if you're familiar with the tools and know how to use them, that is never, ever a replacement for getting actual disabled users' feedback. So by including disabled people in your testing, you're actually including your users, right? You don't want to get into a situation where a guideline might feel like you're in a gray area and you are now going to dictate, if I were like you, I would like it like this. That was a mistake we got into as well, is, oh, if I were blind, I'd want it like this. And then someone else would say, well, if I was blind, I'd want it like this. Turns out neither of us were blind, and so had absolutely no right to give any type of feedback on that. So when you are not disabled, use the guidelines, include disabled people in your testing so they can give you feedback, and probably also include some kind of accessibility statement inside your app with an opportunity for them to give feedback, for just normal users out there to give feedback. It shows that you care from a baseline point of view. And then some tips for creating a backlog. With regards to producing a backlog, like I've heard it recommended that you split the backlog into 4 different categories, right? So you've got a blocker, which prevents users from completing a task. So they are unable to complete a task given a certain accessibility criteria. Severe, which is where a workaround exists, but not all users might be aware of that workaround, so it's still a high priority. And then issues where a user is more frustrated than blocked could be labeled as moderate. For example, autofocus. This is one that frustrates me a lot, is I'll be in a login form, and because I'm fairly quick, I'll be typing in the password section, and then the autofocus focuses, then the page finishes loading, and the autofocus automatically puts me back into login, and now I've just typed half of my password into the username. So that's a frustration, and that's a sort of moderate issue. And one that is worth testing, especially in web apps, because that can be really, really annoying. And minor issues are ones that maybe fail the acceptance criteria but hardly have any impact on users. So things where that would be labeled as minor, things where it's not actually having an impact, but you're kind of technically failing WCAG criteria. And then you can give additional weight to this backlog of issues, considering how frequent this barrier occurs on that ticket or on that particular flow. Another point I'd like to make is just beware of compliance as a goal. I don't know if it was fairly recent or whatever, but someone once came along and said that this was the result of a great accessible staircase, to which I would say you probably haven't asked someone who uses a wheelchair every day to actually look at this. They are not accessible stairs. They are the illusion of accessible stairs. And yeah, so I cannot recommend more checking with actual users. Now, a lot of the time, accessibility advocates will use pictures like this, and you're like, oh, well, how does this translate to software, right? What is this? Like you're giving us a picture that is clearly in the physical world. What kind of shortcuts are we taking in software? A lot of disabled users have a problem with things like overlays or one-click solutions. Like, oh, just add this one link into your app and you'll be compliant in seconds. And I would heavily warn you against using overlays or anything like that. It's more a web problem than a mobile problem, but it's something that we can all be aware of. Is, oh, like in Android, you can make your UI tests more accessible, or consider accessibility by adding one link in, by adding a little library, and then it's one line of code. That is not the end of it. You have to put effort in. So accessibility is not a problem that can just be waved away at the click of a button or inclusion of a library. It's a conscious effort that you have to make and have to put in to the whole process. And by doing it earlier, you are you are baking it into the fundamental aspect of the system rather than trying to add eggs after you've baked the cake kind of thing. Slapping it on at the end will only create more gelatinous situations. Right, some other resources that I can point you out to. These slides will be made available to you. I'll share the link with everybody, but these are some really cool references that I use quite a lot. The first one is just WCAG 2.1. That's the link for it. It's managed by the W3 Consortium. I've included the picture of the WCAG 2.1 map. I'm sorry that this is not readable. I just wanted to show you that there is a kind of one-page summary in PDF form by Intopia that you can go and look at and get an idea of what's included in WCAG. While I know that this isn't readable, it is a much simpler thing to go and read than going through the WCAG 2.1. So I really like this map from its visual aspect, and I just wanted to give you an idea of what it looks like. So I apologize for it not being readable. And then there's also that quick reference guide. This quick reference guide is really cool. It lets you filter the guidance. You can search for different acceptance criteria and different guidelines. You can filter them by whether they're single A, double A, triple A. So if you're particularly looking for something, it's a really nice kind of accessibility search engine that'll just filter them out and give you the WCAG in a card format, which is really cool. And so what's the moral of the story? I think that, the goal of refinement is always to determine whether work can be done and actually completed. And we want to ensure that we produce something that the client wants and that the users can use, right? Remember, our clients, our QAs, everyone might not be able to communicate the solution. I think that a lot of developers want, when they say, oh, you told me the announcement was incorrect, so I fixed the announcement, now you're saying there's another problem. Like, we need to be more curious as to, okay, why is that a problem? And what is the actual problem, not what is the, how do I do the minimal amount of work to just get you off my back kind of thing. So yeah, catching mistakes earlier is just better, and it's more agile. And we can actually fuel our curiosity. Like, curiosity is something we can bring to the table and have these headings. Test-driven development has really made me focus on dependencies. How do I acknowledge and know what dependencies are involved before I start something? And accessibility has tied into that in a very cool relational way, because like I'll think of like things like, oh, I want to write a UI test that flips between light mode and dark mode. And so test-driven development has also made me think about dependencies. So the dependency is that any image I have has a light mode and a dark mode, or the images are capable of being switched around. And that if you give me images, I start asking things like, hey, what is the alt text that needs to be present and all of that. So I hope that these kind of thinking hooks can make us all better solution generators. I hope that your input in refinement will feel more meaningful and will create an impact on your colleagues and clients. This type of working mechanism really helped me focus on not only doing the task right, but by being mentally engaged through all stages of the work. And that I hope you can see how accessibility and other quality-driven metrics can ignite the interest in the work and help you be more effective. Thank you for attending this session, and I hope you have a nice day.